Greetings. On Sunday, I had a long to-do list, and one of the items there was to open a 7-minute voice message that my friend Braun had sent to me at the end of May, so a few weeks ago. It was a long one. It ticked in my inbox in friendly way initially, and slightly more aggressively as time went on. And not because I assumed it to contain some kind of tricky, interesting, negative information, but just because I feel like the more time that passes once you receive a text or a message, the more difficult it is to open it. And that was one of those cases. But I had it on my to-do list. I was in a good groove. I started listening to it. It was fucking great, as meandering ranty voice messages often tend to be. And as I started getting back to her, I had this familiar desire to start and close my own meandering voice message with pleas for her forgiveness, apologizing for being so late and taking so much time to get back to her. And it was conflicting because me and Braun have this kind of a friendship where part of me feels like it's not necessary, but I had some changes had happened in my life, and I hadn't been able to include those in there just because I'd been stressed out about opening that chat. And of course, she responded the same day, and she completely negated the need for any kind of apology for being late, taking the heaviness off my chest and giving me kind of food for thought regarding, firstly, the expectations that we have for communication with our friends, especially now that we have so much availability, and not only to our friends, but also acquaintances, friends of friends, even celebrities. It seems like, and this is perhaps not something that I should be complaining about, but it does feel like keeping the inbox under control is so impossible, and that consistent availability, communication, humor, and potentially even good mood is kind of accepted as the norm right now. So, shame plays an important role in the conflict that we experience as we try to think either what to say, what not to say, when to get back, and whether it's okay if we don't occasionally. And I started thinking about where this really intense conversation culture comes from, and whether there's an antidote to this discomfort that I sometimes feel towards this pressure to be available, and my inability to do that. My tendency to have messages pile up in my inbox every once in a while, and then feel crappy for half of my to-do list being me needing to get back to some folks and having to start and close these messages with apologies. As I looked into it, it turned out that there is a wealth of information about communication styles, especially I guess what I would like to focus on today and bring up is this idea that was studied mostly in the 90s, and it fell out of vogue since then. I'm assuming mostly because it didn't fit with actually functional models that have the power to explain relationships more fully, but it did seem like a good starting point. Conversation around talkaholism. And I found a talkaholism kind of measuring system, a quiz, if you will, and went through it. And so today we're going to kind of cover a little bit about what talkaholism means, why research done on that subject has mostly been limited to the United States, and what other alternatives exist to this very talk-heavy culture, and what are the kind of healthy habits of relating and communication that I personally feel like I would like to just root down in my own world of communication and in my own habits of making sure that I feel good without giving too much of myself away. Yes? Should we do this? All right, so let's start with point number 1. First things first, most of the studies and most of the information that I have in my poems for you today is based on the US society, which is very clearly a very specific sort of world. So take that with a grain of iodized salt. But the first interesting data point that I found is that in Anglo-American societies, talkativeness is really intensely associated with so many positive values. It communicates credibility, attractiveness, power. The talkative person is viewed and seen as very similar to those that are listening. And those positive connections between talkativeness and these positive qualities, they last even if the person doing all the talking takes up 95% of the space. So it seems like in at least the cultural sphere that I am mostly engaged with, puts a heavy positive premium to speaking a lot in social situations. And I was really surprised that there's no cutoff point. I mean, dominating 95% of the conversation is fucking crazy. And I feel like YouTube is an interesting example of that, because in most YouTube videos, especially of people who are doing it themselves without a team behind them, they're just speaking to the camera. They're doing 95 to 100% of the talking, and that intense expression is what allows the listener, the viewer, to build that relationship that in the end makes money for the people that are creating the content. So I guess it's an extreme example of where talkativeness is placed in our culture. Outside of this very specific bubble, there are mostly two differences between cultures when it comes to the conversations that people are expected or kind of need to have to participate in cultures and to belong to their societies. So firstly, it's the how of communication. How direct you can be, what are the subjects that are okay to cover in conversations, and what is not okay to say. And the second important kind of scale or measure that's used when we have conversations about differences between culture is the how much of conversation. So how much time are parties expected to have in conversations? How much silence is there okay to have or be in social situations? And how much do you talk daily? And that little bits like your social strata, your age, and your gender kind of play into it depending on the culture. So here I'll read a little quote from a 2017 article by researcher Min-Sun Kim, doing her work from the University of Hawaii. She writes, "In individualistic contexts, there often appears to be a demand to interact that characterizes much of interpersonal communication, a built-in assumption that when people are engaged in focused conversation, it is their responsibility to keep verbal communication active. On the other hand, avoidance styles, i.e. low verbal output, among collectivists can be seen rather positively, as being nice to others by not imposing. For collectivists, the benefits of remaining silent or saying little comes from being understood without putting one's meaning on record. So that understanding is seen not as the result of putting meaning into words, but rather as the result of shared perspective, expectations, and intimacy." I'll put a little thingy here with that. Whenever these distinctions are drawn, the camera went out for a little bit, but let's just keep going. So I was just saying that it's interesting how talkaholism and the entire subject and kind of a diagnosis even came up within extremely individualist societies. So it seems like the diagnosis or that as a social phenomenon is an example of the excesses of individualistic societies and spaces and countries. But what does it actually mean? Talkaholism, as I found it, is a compulsive need to communicate, a compulsive need to be in conversation, or actually to express oneself, whatever form it takes. It means a person's deep-seated need to be heard, to be understood, is never really fully satisfied, and that there is a deep discomfort with being alone with one's own thoughts, so not externalizing for even a brief period of time. Since it's not really in any kind of used in any kind of academic context, it also means that as you listen to this, don't assume that it's something that you should be diagnosing other people with, or something that you can suggest your asshole flatmate to go to the doctors with. It's just a concept that is an interesting lens through which to analyze ourselves and our own needs, both on and offline, right? So, the studies that were done showed connections between talkaholism and neuroticism, being socially assertive, and perceiving themselves as competent communicators, all of which seem very logical. If I think back to people that felt like they were compulsive about their need for communication, folks that just were not able to shut up, there's a certain neuroticism attached to that, and I think it makes sense that unless you feel like you're a good talker, good conversationalist, that you would continue doing it. An interesting tidbit, actually, another one. There were no significant differences between men and women in those studies. It's important to note that since they were done in the 90s, that gender binary exists in full force in that work, and it would be curious to see if we take into account a more diverse understanding of gender, what kinds of tendencies we would see. It's very possible that there would be none, but I think, and that's its own fucking tangent and story, but I would love to see gender binaries being broken down more consistently in academic work when we do gender comparisons. The talkaholism scale has 25 items. They are relatively repetitive, so I'll just go through 10 of these. Feel free to do that with me, and rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being I never do it, and 5 being I always do it, or this describes me extremely well. Okay? All right. I talk more than I should sometimes. I think that is a 3 or a 4 for me. I would say I talk more than I should sometimes. 3. Often I talk when I know I should keep quiet. 2. Given the chance, I would rather read than talk. See, I'm kind of in the middle there. There would be so many moments when I would rather talk, and moments when I would rather read. It really depends on who's in the crowd. So I would say it's a 2 from me. 4. Sometimes I keep quiet when I know it would be my advantage to talk. When would it be one's advantage to talk? I don't know if I'm in too many of situations such as these. In situations where speaking gives me advantages, I speak. So it's a 1 for me. Given the choice, I would rather watch television than talk. You see, we have these repetitive items here, but that's has to do with the fact that in order for the scale to be consistent, they need to have a couple of repetitive ones to see, to make sure that chance doesn't fuck with the way that people respond to it. 2. I often keep quiet when I know I should talk. 1. Again, let's keep it consistent, bitches. I am a talker. Rarely do I stay quiet in communication situations. It's a 3 or 4. I'll say 4 this time. I feel I must express my opinion in classes and or in meetings. 5. I am a talkaholic. 3. It's funny that a scale would ask its own measure so directly. Weird. And 10. All right. It says, in general, I talk more than I should. See, we have another little repetitive moment here, but we know why. In general, I talk more than I should. No, I think it's a 2 for me. All right, so that's the extent of the scale as we're going to cover it today. I don't see how much new knowledge it would bring to you, but perhaps by going through the 25 questions, we all build slightly more awareness to our tendency to dominate in conversations. To me, it seems like a lot of people take up so much space in social situations just because, firstly, they are really uncomfortable with silences and uncomfortable with people taking their time. They, secondly, perhaps feel like if they do the talking and if they maintain, if they, let's say, respond to the expectation to have the conversation constantly be going and developing, they are doing a service to the other person by avoiding awkwardness. And thirdly, I think they perhaps are just, or we maybe, are just missing some really simple tools to even these things out. The friends that I have, they really know how much I love playing games in social situations and little kind of rounds where everyone answers a certain question or little conversation dribbles. So that's one option there. Another option there is having a sense of curiosity about the situation, about the other people, about what's going on, about what's happened in the world, and posing those questions to everyone that's present. I think, depending on the person, of course, but it's good to give yourself the chance to also get to know other people present, not only the chance for everyone to get to know you if you're the talkaholic part, but maybe you're the person who's slightly more quiet. And to you, I would say people would probably want to get to know you. If developing a sense of a bigger presence in social situations is something that you feel like would benefit you, then repeat to yourself and develop the sense that people want to get to know you. Trust in folks that are present, in their curiosity about you and the sort of person you are and what you could contribute to the conversation. As I was going through it and thinking about what to actually take from this relatively bullshit Likert scale fucking measure thing here, I created my own little guiding light for conversations and talking and interacting in social spaces. You know, this is a tricky time for us all where we're coming out of our hibernation socially and now putting our toes in the water again. In order for me to understand how well I operate in social situations, I created a little for keeping that in mind. Some of the measures and some of the sentences go positively, some of them negatively. I'm assuming you will probably be able to know the difference. I'll put that on the table, or put one on the table, and then give a little bit of background, but trying to be brief. Firstly, I am usually honest when discussing difficult topics with friends. That's a challenge for me, especially with people whose presence I need in my life. A part of me really wants to just say whatever seems to be a good answer or whatever I think they want to hear, but I want to grow out of that. So that's a measure of honesty. 2, I allow for silences in conversation. Where I come from, it's usually okay for silences to be there. I have somehow developed to fill them with chatter and with talk. That's our discomfort with silences is actually why ums, e's, and oohs usually make their way into when we speak. We assume that folks listening to us aren't able to take in a little breath of fresh air, which is what a silence is. I remember editing my last video and the amount of cuts that I had to make because of us making their way onto my speech. That is now changing, and the funny thing is that now that I'm explicitly discussing it is the moment that I am becoming so much more comfortable with silences. 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 Precious. 3, I usually give advice when someone tells me about their problems. We assume that when people talk about the stuff that's going on with them, that they want answers, that they want us to be the guiding light that guides them out of the shit. I'll link this below as well, but I recently listened to a really beautiful episode about the advice trap, which the thesis of the advice trap conversation is that when people talk about the issues or when people put problems or challenges on the table, in most cases, they don't want us to give answers. They either want space to vent, they want us to ask questions and understand better, and thirdly, create a platform where they themselves get to that answer, because in most cases we know what we need to do, but making that decision is just really difficult. So my goal is to avoid the advice trap, this deep desire to give answers and be the knowing one. It's so comforting to know answers, but it doesn't work, unfortunately. When someone asks me a question, I ask that question back. We tend to ask questions that we want to get asked. I'm usually a person with some really good questions, and I really like to be asked questions that prompt curiosity, or I've never been asked before. Good questions are such a beautiful tool in conversations. I apologize for speaking too much. This has to do with the way that femme folks are socialized. We apologize for taking up space. We apologize for being too emotional. We apologize for looking bad sometimes. And that needs to stop. Sometimes it makes sense to apologize for speaking too much, but in most cases it's not necessary. Just speak less next time. I enrich my conversations with stories that demonstrate my vulnerability. This, of course, has its own time and place, but I have realized that unless I reveal something precious or something intimate in a safe space about what's going on, I am not really able to build relationships and build connections with people that I want to do that with. Knowledge that comes from specific life experiences, I would like to not just put that knowledge or that experience on the table. I would like to explain that through a story, especially since we know how important narratives are to the way that people experience the world and learn and empathize. I check in with people I speak with to see how they're feeling. I remember walking with my sister and my nephew. Me and my sister were kind of talking about the way that we grew up. He was kind of asking questions. There was a lot of difficult and tricky stuff that he's mostly aware of, but there's issues that I'm sure that is difficult to take in and listen to, process, even if you have the outlines or even if you actually know the information. So as you do with good sex, especially if you're trying out new things or charting uncharted territory, it's good to check in with the other person to ask how they're doing, ask how they're feeling. That's also a tool that is used in therapy oftentimes, where you come back to the moment, even if you've been in the past or in your thoughts about the future for a while, and ground yourself and give the other person a chance to be grounded by checking in with them. It's a good practice. I try to include everyone in conversations. This is a tricky one. I think not everyone wants to constantly be included in conversations, but if I am the guide or the leader or the kind of connective tissue in a social situation, like I oftentimes am when I'm hosting workshops, it's important for me to make sure that we have systems and logics in place to give everyone a space to express their opinions. And sometimes I even explicitly turn to the person who it seems like hasn't really spoken up or hasn't had space to talk, to just ask their opinion. It might have a slight aggression in it, but it's all about the tone. So if you do it nicely, I think it's a good way to make sure that you have an understanding of how everyone's feeling in a social situation, and secondly, to give them a sense that they're wanted, they're needed, they're important in that space. I feel good when it's done to me, unless I'm depressed and would like to just not be there at all. 9. When someone asks me a question I don't know the answer to, I say it instead of pretending I do. This, again, is a tricky one. Just because I'm reading it and thinking about it, I realized that the moments in which I kind of talk out of my ass the most are moments where I don't have a memory of something specific, and so I'm just kind of considering different options. But generally, if we're exchanging knowledge or exchanging experience, when someone's asked our opinion about something and we don't have it or we don't have the knowledge, then it always makes sense to just say that you don't know. Potentially just ask the question back, and maybe you'll become smarter after it. We so desperately want to seem knowledgeable and seem like experts, but it's freeing to give yourself the space to just not know for a little bit, and that might give the other person a sense that they are the knowledgeable one, and it might give them a sense of their own competence there, or normalize not knowing, which is so desperately needed in the modern society. Alright, so the last one. 10. If I don't feel like participating actively in conversation, I allow myself to be in the periphery without guilt or shame. Addendum to this one. I give myself permission to even leave the situation if I feel like I don't actually want to be there. This, funnily enough, ties into sobriety. I have realized that sobriety makes it much easier for me to make a conscious decision whether I want to be in a situation or I don't. When I'm drinking or when I'm smoking, it's somehow much easier to just go with the groove and ignore what I actually want. Some kind of guard is down. And so sobriety makes it easier for me to stay true to myself in certain situations. But reminding myself and giving myself permission to just be the quiet one sometimes can be so freeing. I have some friends who, after we hang out together in smaller or bigger groups, they say, I felt like I was the quiet one and I felt so boring in that conversation, and I wonder what other people were thinking about me when I didn't have opinions or cool stories to tell. Those are exactly the moments when it makes sense to just like take a little moment and just give yourself space to, I guess you just need to reframe what it means to be the quiet one in the conversation. Maybe you're just the good listener. Maybe you're the mysterious one. Maybe you're the person who's had a long day and they're just kind of relaxing and enjoying the social atmosphere. There's quite a few ways to think about our place in a social environment. And even though there's such a premium in most situations in Anglo-European societies on being talkative and being expressive in more intimate settings with our friends and folks that we love or respect, we recognize the value of taking in instead of constantly putting out. This is a perfect moment for me to finish this video. I'll hope to do a little check-in in some time and see how following these 10 commandments is going for me. And I hope this was useful for you as well. I hope that this little moment of reflecting the way that we interact with each other is allows us to build more fulfilling and positive, deeper relationships with people that we have around us. I kind of hope to do that with you, with the people that are maybe listening to and watching this. Thank you so much for being here. I am excited to have you back, and have a good day.